In this final section, I am going to give my own opinion and draw my own conclusions based on Peter Hyatt's analysis and based on other things I have learned about the case. What follows in this section does not represent the opinions of Peter Hyatt. And note, it is just my opinion. This is not a comprehensive analysis of the Rendlesham case. It is my own thoughts and observations based on what I have learned. Firstly, I will summarise what I think are the most important points that were revealed in the analysis. First, Jim Penniston probably did go out into the forest to investigate something unusual which was there. He might have been taking part in a pre-planned military exercise. His description of the object he went out to investigate is unreliable. He probably did not touch the object as he claimed, and he probably did not take photographs of the object as he claimed. Charles Holt might still be under certain restrictions as to what he can say. We know this is likely because he has never publicly stated that there were nuclear weapons at the Woodbridge base. On the third night, Holt became concerned that a problem of some sort had developed outside the perimeter of the base, which might have involved radiation. He was concerned this could have caused a public relations problem. Charles Holt does not indicate that he believes that there were unidentified objects of concern in the forest. Charles Holt does indicate that he has genuine concern for the people in the farmhouse, but strangely did not express concern for his own safety or his team's safety. Larry Warren does not believe his own account. His account of seeing a craft on the ground and then seeing three entities is a fabrication. Because of this, if we want to get closer to the truth about the Rendlesham incident, I think we must ignore everything Larry Warren has stated about the night he claims to have been involved. Larry does believe his own words when he says the US has lied to the UK for many years. He is committed to his country and expresses unity with the United States. Peter Robbins has either not believed Larry Warren's UFO story or has had serious doubts about it from the very beginning. Peter Robbins got involved with Larry Warren against his own best interests, but was not coerced into working with him. I don't rule out the possibility that Penniston saw an alien UFO. However, taking into account all the points in the analysis, I think the alien visitation theory is unlikely. Military people are not always able to speak 100% freely, and when they are in service, they are only party to information that they need to know. Our key witnesses in this case are all former military. I don't believe we've had the entire truth about the event from those who were involved. This 2016 Daily Express article talks about the nuclear weapon issue. It states that neither the US nor UK governments have ever acknowledged that nuclear weapons were stored at Bentwaters or Woodbridge bases. If nuclear weapons were stored there, their existence would have been highly classified in 1980. So, if something was to occur at or near the base, which could have led people to suspect nuclear weapons were stored there, there would have been immediate measures undertaken by intelligence agencies to attempt to cover it up. It might even be the case that the US military covered something up themselves outside the base and kept it hidden from the British Ministry of Defence. By studying the case, it seems likely that something important happened on the first night. An object was in the woods which perhaps shouldn't have been there. I don't know what it was, but for now, let's just call it the sensitive thing. There was a thing in the woods which was highly sensitive, and Penniston and two others were sent out to investigate it. Think about it. If the object that Penniston and his team investigated was a genuine unknown and it landed outside a military base, then potentially this could have been a hostile craft from a foreign nation sent to attack a weapons installation. surely there would have been a massive military response to an unknown object right next to the base. But there was none. This suggests to me that someone had at least some idea of what the sensitive thing was. In a recent lecture, Charles Holt states that there were multiple stories about what happened during Penniston's investigation. He also states that before he got to debrief Penniston, Burroughs and Cabanzac, they were hypnotized and drugged and screen memories put into their minds. This is where a skilled hypnotist will insert a false memory of an event. Holt states that those he debriefed had already been debriefed by naval intelligence officers and were told what they should say to him. Holt claims they even came to him with written accounts of what they had to say, which were typed by someone else. And the US Embassy and British intelligence were also involved in the first debriefing of Penniston, Burroughs and Cabanzac, according to Holt. He goes on to state that when he debriefed them, they mentioned a structure, but they did not describe it very much. They did not talk about touching it, and they tried to follow it. He stated that something significant happened, and they did approach something. Captain Mike Verano interviewed Penniston and Burroughs the morning after the incident, but as far as I am aware, he's not gone on record. In Colonel Holt's analysis interview, he is very sensitive about the police blotters. The blotters were a chronological listing of everything that the police had been involved with that night. He states that a lieutenant, who was the on-duty senior police officer, who he does not name in the interview, but is probably Fred Buran, told the police not to write anything in the blotters about Penniston's investigation. This suggests to me that the lieutenant may have known what the sensitive thing was and knew that there was a cover-up in place and was making sure there was no official record of what happened. Fred Buran was the person in charge of Penniston, Burroughs and Cabanzac, and who was in communication with them when they went out on their investigation. Here is his witness statement, which I find curious and unconvincing. In Georgina Brunei's book, she reports that she met with Buran and challenged him. She said that she thought the incident started nearer to midnight, not at 3 a.m. as he outlines in his statement. He agreed that the incident started much earlier than 3 a.m. So why did he report the time incorrectly in his statement? And why did he insist that nothing should go in the police blotters? It would be interesting to have this statement analysed for deception. I suspect Buran's statement is deliberately failing to mention the sensitive thing. Georgina Brunei also states that Charles Holt tried to put her off contacting Buran, Holt insisting that Buran would not talk to her, but he did talk to her. Here is another statement from Master Sergeant J.D. Chandler, who listened to Penniston's radio communications. This statement is also unconvincing and reeks of something being covered up. Note his statement starts exactly at 3 a.m. as well. It seems 3 a.m. was the agreed start time for the cover story. One very bizarre comment states that he, Penniston, heard lots of noises in the area which seemed to be animals running around. The words seemed to be means that Penniston is allowing for the noises to be something else. This suggests to me that during Penniston and Burroughs' investigation of the sensitive thing, there was noise present, which they thought was being heard in their radio communication, and they had to put it down to something else, i.e. animals. I conclude from this that whatever happened at the location of the sensitive thing involved noise of some sort. This is at odds with Penniston's claims that the craft was silent. Burroughs also mentions strange noises and animal noises in his account. Would animals really be making noises when you've got people milling around in a forest? I don't think so. Having listened to Colonel Holt's latest lecture, I suspect he did not have a need to know about the sensitive thing. If he was part of the cover-up team, he would not have told the police to write about the unexplained lights in the official blotters. So despite the colonel having a higher rank than the lieutenant, I think he was out of the loop on the purpose of Peniston's investigation. This often happens when a cover-up is being ran, rank is not always followed. So why did Holt go out into the woods on the third night if he did not have a need to know about what was being covered up? This is where I will ask, did Bruce England have a need to know? Was Bruce England handling Colonel Holt by getting him to go out to the forest and showing him the alleged landing site and saying, that's where the UFO was? Was this an attempt to convince Colonel Holt of a UFO narrative? Holt describes England as not the kind of guy to get excited, very mature, very down-to-earth guy, very businesslike. Was England a spook? Working for the operation, covering up the sensitive thing? As far as I am aware, Bruce England has never been interviewed, which I think is significant. I think it is possible that Colonel Gordon Williams was at least partly in the loop and knew something was being covered up. Was Bruce England's role, where he arrived dramatically in the middle of the officers' meal, a pre-arranged event, unbeknown to Holt, and did Williams know that Bruce England was going to take Holt out into the forest? Now, the Holt document is very sensitive, and here it is. It was written a few weeks after the incident. In the memo, Holt describes the craft that Peniston claims he saw. We know this account is unreliable due to Peniston's statement analysis and because he may have been hypnotized, drugged, and had a screen memory inserted. Is it possible that the story about there being a triangular craft of unknown origin is a cover story for whatever was there, and that Holt only knows about the cover story? I don't think Holt had a need to know about what was there on the first night. So how did the Holt document come about? This is how Holt explained it in his lecture. He made an audio cassette tape while he was in the forest, and this was given to his superior, Colonel Gordon Williams. Holt explains that Williams approached him shortly after the events and said, "You had quite a night last night," implying that Gordon Williams already had some intelligence about the events. Holt claims that Williams took his audio tape to a high-level meeting chaired by General Beasley, and it was discussed at a staff meeting by all the US wing commanders in England. Holt asked Gordon Williams what he should report back to the MOD about the incidents. Williams told him, when Donald Morland, the RAF liaison officer, comes back after his Christmas holidays, get with him and see what he wants. Holt states that he waited about a week, and when Morland returned, he told him what he knew. Holt states that Morland was a bit shook up. Bear in mind here, it is possible that those in the know have deliberately allowed Holt to unwittingly spin a UFO story to the RAF liaison officer. So according to Holt, the liaison officer got on the phone and called his boss at 3rd Air Force, and they then called the MOD. After conversations back and forth, a few days later, Morland asked Holt to write him a memo so he could talk from it. This is how the Holt memo came about. The memo was intended for Don Morland's use so he could talk to his bosses at the Ministry of Defence. Was this memo a piece of disinformation, the author being unwitting, coming from the US Air Force to the Ministry of Defence as a cover story for something sensitive involving radiation that had occurred just outside the base? Holt explains how after the memo had been handed over to the MOD, he was expecting further questions from the MOD, but waited and they never came. I suspect exchanges may have occurred between the MOD and the US at a high level that Holt was not party to. Did the MOD try to find out more from the US Air Force about what really happened, or did the MOD already know what happened? Now, after 2 years, the Holt memo was released when 2 US UFO authors who had been given information by Larry Warren requested the release of the memo under an FOI request. The UK Air Force then released the memo. So officially it was released by the UK, but it was requested by 2 US authors. But how did Warren know about the existence of a memo? This suggests to me that Larry Warren may have had a connection to US intelligence. The Holt memo and the Holt tape were sent to two British ufologists, Dot Street and Harry Harris, respectively. Before the memo was sent to Dot Street, she had been in communication with none other than Larry Warren. Was Larry Warren just an attention seeker, or was he wheeled out at this time as an asset of US intelligence and used to put out disinformation which would create a UFO alien encounter narrative prior to the release of the Holt memo, which then seemed to support Warren's narrative? Was this all intended to distract from whatever the sensitive thing was on the first night? From reading Georgina Brunei's book on the case, it wasn't just Larry Warren that was putting out manufactured alien stories. As early as the 2nd of January 1981, just 1 week after the sensitive thing was in the forest, local UFO researcher Brenda Butler was fed disinformation from an American who was working at the base, who gave her the date of the 27th of December and stated that aliens were busy repairing a crashed spacecraft in the forest that night. He also explained how he went out to the crash site in a jeep with 3 others. Sound familiar? Now, if there was friction between the MOD and the US over this incident, we might ask whether the famous News of the World expose of the Holt memo came about as a result of that friction. The US might have wanted the Holt memo public so they could build on their UFO cover story. Perhaps the MOD said, if you don't tell us what really happened, we're going to make your memo public and embarrass you. So perhaps the Americans got hold of it from the British so they could then release it and handle the public narrative. I suspect Peter Robbins might be referring to the News of the World article here.
I had first heard about this in 1983 after Larry had gone public, and there were certain articles appearing about it.
And what about Peter Robbins? Why would somebody who probably did not believe Larry Warren from the start ever get involved with him? I suspect that Larry Warren was not convincing enough by himself and needed help to put over his disinformation.
But groundbreakers are often the ones that are left to their own devices. Larry had no support. He was literally left swinging in the wind to a degree. Everybody wrote their interpretation of his story.
It is my opinion that Peter Robbins was probably made an offer by someone who was connected to intelligence and asked if he would help Larry Warren put across his manufactured tale. You might know that after partnering with Larry Warren for 30 years, Peter Robbins decided to distance himself from Larry Warren. I do not believe this was because he suddenly discovered Larry's account was unreliable. I suspect it was because Larry Warren no longer needed his support, because Larry now has plenty of other supporters who are propping up his fake account. Charles Holt recently stated that he would not have gone public if Larry Warren had not worked with Peter Robbins on the book Left at Eastgate. He stated, "That just rankled me something terrible." What about the strange objects that Charles Holt witnessed on the third night with his team? What were they? As we saw in his analysis, he does not indicate that he believes that there were unidentified objects of concern in the forest. Certainly what he describes sounds unusual, but there is nothing he describes that could not be put down to classified secret technology, in my opinion. Was the light show that Holt witnessed part of an attempt to convince Holt of a UFO encounter in order to also convince him that the object on the first night was a UFO? That's just a hypothesis. I think we need to be cautious about concluding that what Penniston saw was an unknown craft. I think Colonel Holt's examination of the alleged landing site might be reliable, so we could ask what else could cause 3 impressions on the ground laid out in a triangle 9 feet apart? What object might have been sat there that caused these impressions and left a weak radiation reading? Apparently, the impressions were not perfectly circular, they were oval or egg-shaped. Here are some suggestions of what might have been there. An alien craft, a man-made black technology secret craft, or a piece of military hardware which had a nuclear signature. Peter Hyatt suggested that something might have fallen out of one of their planes. Now, Penistons UFO landing site is not far from the Woodbridge base flight path. Could something have dropped from a plane or a helicopter? Also recall that the RAF liaison officer for the base was on holiday during the event. Were the Americans carrying out a clandestine exercise or a test that went wrong? Was a classified top secret drone brought in to help deal with something which had gone wrong? If you have any thoughts, please get in touch. I think this case demonstrates nicely that you should always believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. I'm Richard D. Hall. Good night.